Welcome, everybody. I am Christopher Bacus, as many of you know from past panels. Tonight, we have expanded our reach a bit, and we have broadened our context in order to ensure that we have not only the broadest possible outreach, but the broadest possible sanity check and the broadest possible context as we all move forward during these unusual times. As some but not all of the audience members know, I am myself a product of Roman Catholic schools, attended them entirely through law school. I'm a former naval officer and had a lifetime dedication to the success of Catholic schools, and particularly Jesuit schools. But foremost among all of that was my dedication to the preservation of the urban Catholic school system, because it's a paramount interest to us all that the poor have just as much access as everybody else. The five panelists that we have tonight are Laura Morrison, a Canon Lawyer who's been engaged by several parent groups across the country. The parent groups mostly refer to themselves as concerned parents, and then they associate that with their school of origin. So as to me, I would be a member of the concerned parents, donors, and alumni of Jesuit High School, Sacramento. Laura represents and has representation in other states and across the country as well, and has been an excellent resource and is the developing and evolving expert in the field, if I can say that, be so bold as to say that, Laura, because this is new to many of us. Although we understand that some of this has been an undercurrent for some time, but for many of us, it became exposed, if you will, during distance learning and during the turbulence that beset our country last year, for which we as Roman Catholics have long-standing answers steeped in our theology, philosophy, and tradition. But we saw many of our schools go another direction, shared in that direction by private non-sectarian schools and public schools, all of which suggests that this is not gospel-based, that is rather a secular movement that really undercuts the fabric of our schools and our faith, and as well the Judeo-Christian tradition, with a nod to our mother faith, Judaism. The five panelists, as I mentioned, Laura Morrison, who will weigh in about the similarity of these teachings across the country, how they butt in, if you will, to our schools and disrupt what should be areas of inquiry and learning for our young, and developing and forming them as Catholic citizens of virtue. She will note the commonalities across the country, even the commonality of the denials by administrators in schools that they're even going on, which is perhaps the most insidious of anything. Colleen Warshauer is a school psychologist who will address the possibility of harm associated with these teachings and the notion of division that they foster and perpetuate. It is, for all of us, astonishing that we should even have to advise schools, particularly Catholic schools, that divisive teachings are dangerous and pose threats to children. But here we are in 2021, having to alert the schools of their responsibilities to children. Alana Fishbein, with whom I work on No Left Turn in Education, has become the national authority on the development of these teachings in public schools. She counsels and deals and interacts with good people across the country who are parents and who believe and see exactly what effect this is having on student life, the students' emotional lives, and the corruption of learning that this represents. Alana has as all of our panelists do, has a marvelous resume that has allowed her in her past to touch on all of these things. And now she brings her professional wisdom and her own background as a parent to our movement. And we're delighted to have this wonderful association with Alana. So thank you, Alana. Andrew Seeley is a tutor, which we would know as a professor at Thomas Aquinas College. Thomas Aquinas College is a college in just outside of Ventura, California, and is a wonderful place of learning and inquiry, with an emphasis on inquiry. And it has the learning that we might have seen the last remnants of when I was an undergraduate at the University of San Francisco between 1974 and 1978. The University of San Francisco is, of course, Jesuit run. And as I like to share with people, I went to school and received my Roman Catholic education in each of the schools where I saw the last of the old and the first of the new. And I regret to report that the first of the new has brought us inexorably to this point today, where rebellion has become more fashionable than faithfulness. We have Michael Van Hecke, who is the president and co-founder of the Institute for Catholic Liberal Education and the Catholic Textbook Project. The reason that we have Michael and Andrew trailing our program tonight is because after dispensing word of the problems and threats we face, we wanted to give you hope, to show that there is a path forward. There are right answers to this that speak to the fullness of childhood and the development of our young, and the faithfulness and the accessibility of faithful teaching, and the logic that our young thrive with structure and learning and inquiry. And that's how we will form citizens of virtue and faithful Catholic Christians. So it's not we've not ranked our speakers. They are presented this way as a matter of logic and presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to my good colleague, Laura Morrison. And,
thank you.
Laura, if you can take it away for your 10 minutes.
Yes, well, I will be briefer than that. Thank you, everyone, for your attendance. I probably have either corresponded with many of you, spoken on the phone, via email, even text messaging in some cases, because of very, very grave concerns that you rightfully have about what is happening in the Catholic schools. My sense is that there is, for want of a better word, I don't want to say plot, but there's a plan. I do believe, as we've talked about before, that it's really out of almost a communist, atheistic playbook. I think that if you do take a look again, I know I'm hammering it, but I'm going to hammer it again, at the Society of Jesus, Apostolic Preferences, 2019 to 2029, you will have a firm understanding of the direction in which this is going. And what has happened is there are what I would call apparatchiks who have woven their way into the system and have hijacked it. And if you put that together with the evident compromised teachings of not only the Society of Jesus, but in all of the Catholic schools, but for the schools that hold themselves out, and it's no secret, as being more traditional, you just have this mess on your hands. So for example, and we've talked about this, those of you who are at the schools that we're working with and that we've been talking with, you have letters that start and get circulated expressing concerns about racism. You always have what I call, and actually I felt Bishop Daley picked up on when we had our meeting with him, these mean girls who come in and they're either atheistic or they're radical left-winged persons, very, very bold with feminism, very, very bold with communistic ideology, even if they hold themselves out as having been schooled in a Catholic education. And it's not just women. I mean, it's mean people too. It's a euphemism. But people who are designing what they are doing to hijack the educational process at the Catholic schools so that they can denigrate, weaken, and essentially take over. I know I sound conspiratorial, But I'm telling you, when I'm speaking with people from the Northeast, the Southeast, the Southwest, the West, out East here, miles from where I'm talking to you from right now, and plopped in the middle of the country, from down in Florida to up in Rochester, to up in Spokane, to down in Phoenix, to over in Sacramento. That's a problem. And I've said it before, and I'll keep saying it. It's cookie cutter. So if there's human geography down in Tampa, Florida, and you do your research and you find out what human geography is all about, you're going to see at least fascist, at least socialist, and flat out communistic ideology that is sourced in that curriculum, in that course curriculum. And the same thing is being taught here and there and there. If they're swapping curricula, it wouldn't surprise me. Swapping the syllabus, it wouldn't surprise me. None of it would surprise me. And I'm very sad to say, and I know we should be hopeful, and I'll get to that piece in a minute. But I want to present to you like a coach, because I think that it's very, very important to continue to crawl into the schools. The folks in Spokane very brilliantly have taken this idea that Governor Abbott from Texas was talking about. Crawl into the libraries of the schools that your children are attending. Crawl onto any website that you can. Make it a point to sit in and listen. Make it a point to make their business your business. It's critically important. It's really like a lifeboat ethics kind of thing for the Catholic educational system. And it's not just the Jesuits. This whole co-opting or hijacking is also taking place at diocesan schools. The folks who have worked most closely with me and with whom I'm preparing dossiers are Jesuit schools. But that's not to suggest that the people who are reaching out are just from Jesuit schools. They're just not. It's all over. And what we've been focusing on in the schools, your school and Spokane, is with Colleen's gracious work with our students and their families, is to really evidence to the powers that be, to the church hierarchy, that there's real harm taking place in these schools. And we really, really need to carry this to the administrations, and to carry it to the boards, and to carry it to the bishops, and to carry it to the archbishops, and to carry it to the cardinals, and to carry it across the pond, because it's very real. Now, you know, I don't get into CRT and all the alphabet soup things. I am not saying I don't care about that, but the bottom line is there's bona fide harm to children taking place. Harm to children. Duty to report kinds of harm to children in some cases. And that vests us with a substantial responsibility, does it not? And it vests the church hierarchy with a substantial responsibility. And we have the right and duty to keep apprising them and nip and chink at the armor of this very, very insidious platform. And I know many of you are students of history, and I know that you know what I'm talking about, and I know that you care, and I know that you're committed to crawling into these schools and doing as much homework as you can about the homework and about what's being done to the children in these schools. And I'll leave you with a couple of other thoughts. What's particularly becoming insidious about this is that it's crawling out of the theology classes, because of course we were picking on them with the theology, because if there was a fleeting reference to gospel values, if that, it was ridiculous. So now the schools are kind of hip to that. So now it's showing up in English classes. Gosh, it's showing up in one location in physical education class. So the platform and the people that are pushing the platform have a lot of strength behind them, and they're very insidious. So please do not just look for this in theology class. Look for it in the lunchroom. Look for it in what's hanging in the schools. And I know you are all doing this, but just to reinforce that and to reinforce to you what I'm seeing and hearing. There's a real element of fear with parents, and I understand that. I am not going to tell any parent that they have to push if their child is going to be, if they feel in grave danger and in grave harm. However, I also see that when we talk about it and we bring it out and we bring it up, it really, really can be very, very helpful. I'll tell you also that we did meet with Bishop Daley. We had a wonderful, wonderful meeting with him. And what's great right now is that he...
Laura, please note the diocese.
Oh, that's in Spokane. Very receptive, very wonderful. And he, as the kids would say, knows what time it is. And the wonderful news about him is that he's just taken over probably this week. I don't know. I think our other panelists can tell you. But he's now the General Secretary for Education of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. So that's a really big deal from the perspective of the parents and the corruption of what's taking place in the schools. It's very, very good news. And it's really, really a cause to really give thanks to God for that movement of the Spirit that has occurred.
Thank you, Laura. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
I will note in this transition that many of our schools are Jesuit schools and now universities. And I take it as a point of great satisfaction that I can make a contribution to that, myself, who attended 11 years of Jesuit schools. And for purposes of moments just like this, I performed a count of the Jesuits that I was taught by over those 11 years. And it's 33 Jesuits at a time, and of course, there were more of them. And I want to thank them all individually for being the source of my strength and resolve to ensure that the Jesuits are associated with only the best of learning, not the worst of it. So I use that. I now turn it over to Alana. Alana, welcome. We're delighted you're here, and we thank you so much. As a former naval officer, I like noting that Alana was a member of the Israeli Defense Force. So
yes,
we're not soldiers, but I was a sailor and she was a soldier. So.
Well, you know, many times from the very beginning, because when I launched the movement, there was nobody there. I tried to look for, and quite early on, people kept asking me, including, in interviews, if I'm not afraid. And I would say, yes, I am afraid, but I'm more afraid what will happen if we are not fighting. That's more scary. And to the point that just Chris was making, I would also say that as a Jew and Israeli, I grew up in Israel, I know what happened when you don't fight. We have a very long history of millennials that we know what happens when you don't fight. So for me, it's it's a calling that I feel that I have to do it. I have little kids in school now. They're 9 and 4th graders and 6th grader, and my older one is 20. So he went through the system. What Laura is describing is really the overall, I concur with everything she said, and it's the overall picture nationwide. My kids used to be in public school, and because of what they experienced over the years, but really the blow up came after the killing or the death of George Floyd. And indeed, it's true to say that many people have been exposed to what's happening in schools as a result of the COVID and distance learning. However, it wasn't as bad. I mean, the really avalanche of this kind of indoctrination came after the killing of George Floyd. So it's all of a sudden, it became an open season on all our schools. And when I launched the movement a few months later, the end of August 2020, I thought I'm going to address the issue in public schools, because it didn't even dawn on me that something like this will happen in private schools. And because of my experience with my kids, by then I already moved them to a religious Jewish school, not a regular Jewish school, because they are as bad as the public schools, if not worse. So right from the very beginning, I would say the first day, parents started approaching me from parochial schools and charter public private schools and all schools. And that's when I said, well, we are dealing with the children of America and with the future of our nation. There's no different from child to child. They're all experiencing it in whatever school. And I would like to say, to tap on something, the few things that Laura said. And one of the things is the whole thing, is it a conspiracy? And sometimes you cannot avoid but think that, or see that it is. One of the mothers from my area who had 3 kids in the Episcopalian Academy, which was considered really a top school in Pennsylvania. I'm from the suburbs of Philadelphia. She wrote me and she said that in fact in the Episcopal Academy, it started back in 2015, 2016. And she had a hypothesis. Well, it's not tested, but really it kind of feels that there is a basis for that. And maybe one day somebody will study it. She said, they are targeting private schools, top private schools, because they know that the kids that graduate from those schools will go to the Ivy Leagues, will go to top universities, and will become the future leaders of this country. So there is the whole thing of, is it conspiracy? I don't know, but there's something that's resonating when, as I said, we're getting more and more, a lot of people with kids in different parochial school as well as private school are telling us what's happening in their school. You cannot just ignore this possibility that indeed they become the target in order to, groom the future leaders of this country. Other points that you're making about, and I've been saying that from day one when I launched the movement, it's literally the school have been hijacked. And I'm talking about school. I honestly don't think we can, at this point, from what we know, separate public school from parochial school and from private schools. In fact, I often say that you have to take a tweezer in order to find the schools that do not engage in heavy duty indoctrination. It's not a sleight hand at all. It's really very heavy duty and across, and Laura is absolutely right. Physical education, the arts, the schools are tapestry of BLM science and BLM curriculum, etc. A lot of this material, that is developed in, now there are more and more obviously organizations, but all this material is developed by all those groups that are literally sensing what an incredible cash cow it is. And we have charlatans coming every day, and there are with all sort of very funny name degrees, in all sort of funny names, doctorates in gender study and in cultural whatever studies, and all those that, it's a very peculiar, what is really the theoretical or the practical or any intellectual basis for those kind of degrees. But they are right there, they're producing them like hot potatoes in the universities. And those people then go and market themselves as expert in DI, expert in all those acronym or other terminology that they're using in order to deceive parents about what they're doing. So in fact, when all the schools are graduating those impressionable young teachers who go to those teacher colleges and most of those departments at universities, and they're coming and then they're populating the teacher position in our schools, all our schools, religious school. As I said, I'm sending my kids to an Orthodox Jewish school. And I just recently found out, this is only their second year there because they've been in public school. I just recently found out, to my surprise, that many of the teachers there not Jewish, and if they're Jewish, they're not necessarily Orthodox. And I assume that they are, and that's how I'm finding, for example, a teacher there that disparaging Columbus. I'm not saying that Columbus was a saint, but kind of just talking about this horrible person without putting it in the contents of the period, without putting it in the contents of, the other things that he has done, etc. That's already tell you what kind of indoctrination that teacher went through when she has been educated. And obviously, now I'm finding out also that the school is not necessarily reading what kind of books she's teaching from. And that's another problem that is very common. The books that are in the libraries, the books that our kids are being taught from, most of them are not even books. All this industry that have been producing this material, a lot of it is online. And today we're asking the school, we would like to see the textbook. We would like to see the textbooks. In recent years, you don't find much textbook. A lot of it is online material, and make life very easy for the teachers because everything is packaged for them. Many of them don't really screen it or review it or critique it. The same what happening with the library. The library has their degree in library studies, they become librarian. How many people really review the books that go into our libraries? And now, we're talking about, I agree with Laura. I don't use the word, the terminology CRT. I very much emphasize and ask parents, forget about the language because they are really trying to trap you into a theoretical academic argument. But that's not the point. The
Correct.
point is, what are they doing with our children? What are they teaching them? And what are the harm to our children? Mentally, emotionally, intellectually, socially, all this. The harm is in every perspective. What are they doing in terms of ruining the relationship between parents and children? Because they are telling the children in the classes, what happened in the class stays in the class. Don't share with your parents. Your parents won't understand. They are, antiquated. They're coming from a different, world. And they're literally drawing a wedge between parents and children. And it's very, very dangerous. So you can call it whatever you want. One thing I do know, what you are doing is harmful for the children. And again, the other issue why I'm not using the word also CRT, from the very beginning, I warned people that the most dangerous thing is not what we call CRT, but rather the sexuality education, the comprehensive sexuality education. Because I found it, and Chris would remember from the first meeting, and that's why I was chasing a person to become a board member, which she eventually became our board member, because she's been dealing with that for over 20 years in the Family Watch International, in the UN, but also a lot in United States. I believe what they're doing in the comprehensive sexuality education, they are completely undermining human society. Because if there's no man and a woman, and you can, every given moment, you can change your mind about who you are, and you don't have to choose from two sexes. It's beyond of gender fluidity. When they talk about gender fluidity, they're not talking about men, woman, bisexual, transgender, whatever. They talk about that you can be what today is called furry. And kids, you go to colleges and there are kids that wear tails behind, attached to their pants, because they can be, a parrot, a cat, a cow, whatever they want, and they can change it. As well as they can be, in fact, just an item. And one of the earliest videos that we put on our Facebook page was a teacher, in fact, from California, 25-year teacher in California that was disgusted and understood the dangers of all this, opening a book for kindergarten, starting in kindergarten. And when you open the book, the 2-page, and she's showing how kids can choose from an endless kind of possibilities, items, animals, whatever you want. And of course, human being to become at any given moment. So this kind of abuse, poisoning of our children from a very, very tender age, pre-kindergarten and kindergarten, is completely destructive to the individual child, to the family, to the community, as well as to the society. The last comment I'll make, and then if later there'll be a question, I'll be happy to entertain them. We have to think about also what it does to our nation and to our ability to survive as a free nation, because all this that is taking place in the school obviously comes at the expense of teaching academics at the top level. They are dumbing down the student, they are lowering the standards, and 2 + 2 is not 4. We know it. And now, and again, that's another issue that from the very beginning, I talked about science and math, and people thought I'm crazy. But now they know about ethno-math and ethno-science. For the Chinese, 2 + 2 is 4. For the Russian, 2 + 2 is 4, as well as for the Iranians. And if we are going to, conduct our system and teach our kids that 2 + 2 is not 4, and then dumb them down to the lower standard, it's insane. And when talking about our population, I'm talking about everybody, because there is the assumption in all this material, there is the assumption that people of colors cannot achieve. People of colors are inferior, and they are not able to be at the same level. And also making an assumption that all people that are fair skin color all are capable of achieving. And obviously we all know about now the white adjacent, about the Asians. So it's a culture of discrimination. It's a culture of destruction. Obviously, it's a culture of segregation. It's a culture that will destroy from the personal level to the national level.
Thank you very much, Alana. And I think that's the perfect segue to our school psychologist, and we thank her for being here tonight. Colleen, I introduce you and give you the floor. We can't hear you.
Unmuted now. That's better.
We thought you were chosen to self-identify today as a silent movie actress.
Guess what I'm saying, but you'd never guess. Listening to Laura and to Alana, it's just the thing that's just, what's coming to mind is something that Carl Jung would say. If you have a client who acts in a particular manner, you have no idea why she's doing what she's doing, occasionally you can look at the outcomes of her behavior and infer motivation. So I'd say if these teachers were my client and I was inferring motivation, I would be seeing what was manifested through those interviews with the kids from that particular high school. I spent upwards of over 4 hours talking with these kids. It was only supposed to take an hour. But it turned into like 4.5 hours because they have so much to say, And, the outcomes, I'll tell you, here are the central themes of what I heard from these students. Depression, anxiety, fear, self-doubt, lack of trust in not just individuals, but in organizations, in religion, lack of confidence, pessimism, and nihilism. And so if you wanted to infer motivation, I'd say that's exactly what if that's what they're trying to do, they're doing an A1 job of it, because that's what's occurring. Now, that doesn't mean that your students will succumb to any of these transitory feelings. Probably not, because I'm taking a wild guess that your kids are not coming from a place of being exposed to a lifetime of abuse, neglect, and trauma, as the kids that I work with on a daily basis in the public schools where I work. So when I started to really look at what is the psychological significance of doing, and I'll just use critical race theory as an example, because that was the theme of the discussions, what the kids were exposed to during this tender time when they're catalyzing their identity. You know, kids don't just go from kids to adults. They have this in-between time where they're trying to figure out who they are and they're identifying with groups. So I broke down the tenets of critical race theory of CRT. I broke down the tenets and I found correlates. And the correlates that I found were in the scientific structures of depressed thinking. So here's what I came up with. So if you're a depressed person, according to the founder of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is, his name is Aaron Beck, put out these tenets. Here, if you're a depressed person, you think these 4 things. I'm a terrible person. The world's a terrible place. I'm powerless. And the world's going to end soon anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Let's like just humor me on this. Look at CRT. Tenet 1, racism is normal. It's baked into the DNA of every white person, manifesting itself by the time you're 3 months of age. What does that sound like? I'm a terrible person. Okay, tenet 2, racism was created by whites to serve their purposes and to harm people. What does that sound like? The world's a terrible place. Tenet 3, which is a combination of two of them. There's actually 4 tenets, but I put the last 2 together. Only people of color can talk about racism. That sounds like powerlessness. If you're white, you can't talk about it. And in that, also in that tenet, that eventually the white people will be silenced. And what does that sound like? Well, the world's ending, or at least my world. So is it any wonder when you're exposed to this kind of thinking and this kind of ideology at that age where there's no context for these kids? And you say, oh, don't take it personal. It's personal, and it's meant to be personal. Is there any wonder why these kids are in such distress? I suppose that you could say they've been traumatized. And some people might laugh at that. But the human brain was not made to handle betrayal. It blows us out of the water, sends us into ontological shock, totally wipes out the axioms of our belief systems. We can handle things like earthquakes and natural disasters or even wars. We can't handle betrayal. It just does us in. That's why these kids are having such a hard time with this, because their brains don't know what happened. So for all of the parents who have been told that you're making a big deal about this, and other people have minimized your concerns and your experiences, that's not true. It's actually not true. There's been significant harm to these kids. So what can you do? Well, there's a lot that you can do. If trauma begins with betrayal and trauma begins in a relationship, traumatized people actually recover in the context of a concerned and loving relationship. Starts with a relationship and it ends with a relationship. Your kids have to have context. If you can remember this little acronym, VET, V-E-T, validate, empathize, but tell the truth. So, yes, I'll make up a name, John. Yes, John. This is it's horrific, and I've learned why, and I'm going to tell you why you're really struggling with this. You're feeling betrayed. You're feeling rageful. You're feeling like giving up. So validate, empathize, but tell the truth. But the truth is, you can say that the truth in any manner of ways. If it was me, I would say the truth is you've come into contact with some sort of malevolence. And that's just the bottom line, is that this is a contaminated theory. And I would say that the other part of the truth is that this is a political theory. This isn't a scientific theory that has some sort of rigor. It's a theory. And like all theories are tools. I use theories all the time in my work. Theories are just tools that you use when you want to solve a problem. Okay, so what can you do? Validate, empathize, tell the truth. Focus on competency. People who have been traumatized get out of it best if they can learn something new, learn it well, and do vigorous exercise. And that's what the research says. Bottom line for if you really, really want to get down to how to help, keep on track with learning and make sure they do a lot of physical exercise. Tell them the truth, contextualize for them, make sure they know that they're not alone in this, okay? And validate what they've been through. Warning signs. I had to write them down so I didn't forget. All right, here are some warning signs that if your child persists month after month and it seems as if he or she is just not snapping out of it. Intrusive memories, either when he or she is awake or asleep, having dreams, having daydreams about these events that have taken place. Avoidance of the place. School phobia comes to mind for me in my work. Avoidance of that person, of that particular professor or classroom. Negative changes in thinking and mood, pessimistic thinking, depressed moods, anxious moods, fearful moods, avoidant moods, dependent moods. Changes in physical and emotional reactions, somaticizing, which is stomach aches and headaches and aches and pains that maybe have their etiology in emotions and not exactly in their body. And exaggerated emotional reactions, startle reflexes, crabbiness, touchiness, things like that. Okay, I think that I've covered what I wanted to cover.
So thank you, Colleen. That was excellent. And I think that is one of the points that we have made with the schools that we come in contact and that we've specifically made here in Sacramento is, what studies have you done? How do you know the damage? How do you know what impact you're having? Have you even thought to question whether you're having an impact, such as the one you just described? So thank you very much for that. I'm going to turn now the floor over to Andrew Seeley. And Andrew, this next segment is Hope Moving Forward. You are not alone. We do have existing teachings, and the world can be a place of wonder for our young if put on the right path. So I'm going to turn it over now to Andrew.
Thank you very much, Christopher. very grateful to be here. I'm so admiring of the efforts you all are making. I know how difficult it is as parents to have to step into a situation like this where you're fighting with your schools, but it'll be very encouraging, I think, to know that you are on the right track in terms of the way the church sees education, and also to know that there is a lot of hope, that a lot of good has been done in Catholic education over the past 10, 20, 30 years. And hopefully this is just, your movement is just another wave of this really reorienting Catholic education to what it should be doing and what it has done in the past. So I want to start by saying that there are some ways of inroads into understanding the Catholic Church's teachings on education and on Catholic schools. And one I highly recommend, this is a work that we at the Institute try to have all our schools, all our teachers read carefully, and we encourage parents to do it as much as possible. It's called The Holy See's Teaching on Catholic Schools by Archbishop Michael Miller. It's a short book, which I love. It's a practically oriented book. It's the heart of the book mentions 5 benchmarks of Catholic schools, 5 things that we can look to help us discern on a first level how well our schools are doing in terms of being really Catholic schools, not just secular schools with a mass and a religion class and maybe uniforms, but really to thoroughly live their Catholic identity. It's called The Holy See's Teaching on Catholic Schools by Archbishop Michael Miller. And the first benchmark he mentions is that Catholic schools should be oriented, their goal should be to form their students as good citizens of the heavenly kingdom and good citizens of their earthly society. So right away, and I think this is very important for us as parents to realize, is that schools are not there first and foremost to make it so that our kids are going to get high SAT scores, high ACT scores, get into colleges that are going to put them on the track to get good careers. That's not unimportant stuff. But the most important thing is that these schools are agents of our formation efforts. They are there to help us in our formation efforts as Catholic parents, to form them in being complete Catholics and to have them become adults for whom the church is at the center of their lives. And so we need to the schools need to be oriented towards forming their students as good citizens of the heavenly kingdom and of their temporal society. An important part of that is Catholic schools need to make it so their kids identify with the church. The church should not be something foreign to those who are in Catholic schools and are educated in that milieu. They should be come out of it feeling that they are one with the Catholic Church throughout the world, and that they're confident in the Catholic Church. They're confident being Catholics. They see the beauty and the goodness of being Catholics and what it can do. The second benchmark is this formation has to take place in the light of Christ. The educators, the leaders of our schools need to see that they are trying to form the young in the light of who Jesus Christ is, as the Word made flesh, and all that entails. So Christ should be in the forefront of their minds as they're working with the kids, and they should be forming them in their relationship with Jesus Christ. Prayer, the orientation towards prayer and the impact on the prayer life of their kids should be front and center in their minds. A third one, which is very important, which I imagine many of you are encountering now, the third benchmark is that the schools should really be communities of communities which are uniting educators, clergy, students, and families working together in this to build up these human relationships. They should not be simply institutions where kids and parents are processed, certainly should not be sort of counter communities to the family communities. The families must be intimately involved in this. And they should also be very careful. This is something Archbishop Miller really emphasizes, is that they should be careful to include the bishops and the ecclesial leaders of the church as part of the school community. So the young should be connecting with their bishops and their church leaders as part of the school formation. And a fourth one, which is one I love to think about a lot, is that the curriculum in a Catholic school, there should be a Catholic worldview throughout the entire curriculum. All areas of the curriculum should be trying to take advantage of the opportunities to form kids in the wisdom of the church. That doesn't mean that they're twisting their disciplines, but that they believe that their different subject areas are themselves ways of finding truth, goodness, and beauty for all human beings. And in doing that, they're roads to Christ. So I think we people mentioned that that say in history has become a really crucial discipline. It went from being a discipline where students were offered great examples of human drama, human triumph, human tragedy, the spiritual consequences of human activity, to a value neutral, simply social studies look at, let's just look at different peoples in a way that encouraged cultural relativism, to now being taken as history is an opportunity to show you how evil everything in the past has been. You can't ignore history if you care about the total Catholic formation of your children. And similarly, you can't ignore what's going on in science class. You can't ignore what's going on in literature. And you can't even ignore what's going on in mathematics and what kind of a formative effect that's had. And then the fifth mark is that in a Catholic school, the teachers are witnesses. The teachers must be witnesses of the faith. And that it goes for all the teachers across the board. Archbishop Miller is very critical of schools that hire a large number of non-Catholic teachers, because that personal relationship that every teacher and every subject is forming with the kids, that is their opportunity to evangelize. And if they don't have the faith in them, then the kids are going to get that. That's going to come across to them, and their teachers are going to become witnesses of non-belief. So these are the 5 benchmarks. Really urge you to read Archbishop Michael Miller's book, and to bring that to your schools and say, this is what we should be looking to. And then I'm going to just tell a little bit of the history of some of the schools who've been doing that. It's really remarkable, and I think it should give you a lot of encouragement and confidence, because American parents are very powerful forces. When we get concerned about our kids and realize that something terrible is going to happen to our children, people better watch out, because we have, not only do we have the deep passion for it, but we have a history of freedom and a history of initiative that has led many parents over the course of the last 30 years to start their own schools, even when they felt like they didn't really know what they were doing, but they knew that their children were going to be disserved if they didn't take more control of their children's education than they were even comfortable with. But as Americans, we know that when we have to do that, we will learn. We will find ways to learn how to do it. We will seek direction. We'll learn to make the best judgments. We'll learn from our experience. We'll network, and we will figure this out. And the whole development of the internet is, for all of its evils, the internet is a God-given gift to us to be able to organize and spread success stories and success and templates of success. So what began in the 1990s as a few random families pulling out of the system and going their own way in terms of homeschooling and independent schools. And also this happened both inside and outside of the church through lots of failures and some successes, but the successes growing in experience and competency became then lights and models and sources of direction for the next wave of parents. And so we have gone from a handful of these efforts in the 1990s to now, through the work of organizations like the Institute, our Institute for Catholic Liberal Education, we've grown to about probably 250 plus Catholic schools that have fully embraced those Holy See's teaching on Catholic schools and are living this and offering a beautiful educational experience for the kids that they will remember and will stay with them all of their lives. So I think I'll just stop there and turn it over to Mike, who can give us some more details on the current, I think, some current good news in our Catholic situation.
You want me to roll right away, Chris?
Yes, please.
Okay. You know, Andrew, you mentioned parents will fight, and Alana, you referenced back to 2019 and 2015. And when I was 50 years ago, there were problems in our Catholic schools, and my parents stepped up to fight. I got a bad schooling, but I got a great education, because by the time I went to college, I realized education is very important, because my parents gave my youth to fighting for authentic Catholic education. So it's been around a long time. The teachers that we have in our schools have been raised in this milieu. They've been formed in these ideologies. You know, the fault line I really see, I would say, comes down to the ideology, or not the ideology, the anthropology that we base all of our educational decisions on: pedagogy, curriculum, environment, etc. And American education was really, the granddaddy of it is John Dewey. It's clear what he was and what he was promoting. And that is not a Christian anthropology. That's an anthropology of the worker man. Our anthropology is Christian. We know where kids come from. We know where kids are going to. They come from God. They're going to God. And so our challenge is to figure out how to all get there together. And to get there in that way, St. Catherine says, all the way to heaven is heaven. Well, heaven's going to be joy. Heaven's going to be praise. Heaven's going to be, well, I like the eternal banquet idea myself, but if all the way to heaven is heaven, this is what we need to give our children. This is the way our schools need to look. So one little piece of history before I just run through a quick list of the good news, because somebody asked about accreditation. Accreditation, credentialing, standards, etc. For 40, 50 years, our dioceses have self-imposed an adopted structure of requirements of accreditation and credentialing and standards, and they're all taken from the state. They're all taken from whatever the state requires, we're going to require, because we want to show that we're as good as the state. And yet, what the state thinks or knows about education is a small fraction about what we know in our heritage of 2,500 years of the development of education in Western civilization. So what is just starting to happen now in these last 5 to 10 years is, even at the diocesan level, they're starting to question those. And some dioceses, other dioceses they're still loving it. But we have 40 superintendents in our network who are saying these are self-imposed. these policies are not required by the state. So just today, we were in a state with, the second most populous Catholic school system in the country. And our executive director asked the director of the Catholic Conference, what do you think about our new credential program? And she says, we love it. So Beth said, you mean we could do that for all your schools? And she said, absolutely. So this is the thinking that's going on. It is a wonderful renewal thinking. This is a radical transformation that's coming. It's the light in the darkness. So just a quick rundown of what Andrew was speaking to, the good things that have been happening. The Institute for Catholic Liberal Education, we've had a 50%, over 50% increase in member schools this year, which represents thousands of teachers and tens of thousands of students. And that's just the member schools. There's probably double that in schools that are coming to our programs or having us come and do things for them that are starting to take these 5 marks of a Catholic school and make them their own. We put out a book last year, Catholic University of America Press relaunched its old imprint called Catholic Education Press. And we were the second book imprinted under that. It's called Renewing Catholic Schools. And the Holy See's Teachings, the first book you should read, but the second book is Renewing Catholic Schools, because it gives you a picture of where things have been and where things could be, and then stories of the renewal. They're very inspiring and very hopeful. That is also, I'll give that to Chris, and he can post that on the chat or in an email later. But let's see what else. Yeah, so we have 40 superintendents in our network. We have this summer launched a Catholic Educator Credential program, and that is replacing the state crediting, state credentialing of teachers in the Archdiocese of Denver, because the superintendent and the Archbishop very clearly understood the state's goals are not our goals, and we must we must think differently. So in a radical way, they said we need to start over and think, how do we want to prepare teachers for Catholic schools? That has gained a lot of national attention, so that is going to be growing quickly. Even before we started rolling full bore on the Institute, we started with curriculum and started producing history textbooks for Catholic schools. It's called Catholic Textbook Project. We're now in over 100 dioceses. Over 500,000 kids have used our books over the years. And this last year, RCL Benzinger started to carry our books and their book back because they have a big national sales force, which we don't have. We write fantastic history books, but we don't have a big sales force. So we're glad that they have jumped in. I would say if you compared their sort of political spectrum with ours, very different, but they're all in. They think it's fantastic. So they're open to real growth and change. Another one of our partners is Classic Learning Test, which now offers an alternative to the SAT and ACT. It is an online-based test. It's very high level. It uses all classic, the canon of literature, Western literature and science and theology and philosophy. Those are the readings that you find in this test. It also has made great waves and grown greatly over the last 3 years. So lots of big press on the CLT too. And of course, it just happened to do well in a time when nobody could go to school and sit down and take an SAT. So they're enjoying great things. You know, go visit their website, cltexam.com. They have wonderful articles and blogs that'll really suck you in. I was in DC on Monday to meet with a group to talk about accreditation, because we need a new national Catholic accrediting agency. NAPSIS is one that already exists. It's primarily devoted to small schools, the small independent schools. And what we need is we need, in addition to that, a Catholic accrediting agency that will really help guide. It will be based on these 5 marks of the Catholic school that Andrew referenced. And that will really help guide those schools on how to make sure that they're Catholic. Because if I have Northeastern states accrediting agency come in and accredit my school, they're not saying anything about my Catholicity. They're just saying you're accredited. So we need more than that. We've been working with the Institute with a number of colleges on their interest and desire to revamp their teacher education programs. I'm on the school board, the Archbishop's School Board in Denver, to help them put up a new high school, because they're getting so many students coming up through the expanding network of Catholic liberal arts and classical Catholic schools. They need another high school. So they're renovating this big old public high school. It's beautiful. There's a growing network of Chesterton academies, which are parent-founded high schools. Again, with sort of a classical liberal arts approach. NAPSIS I mentioned. There's a lot of good things going on, and it's bubbling up all over. It's moderate in the Catholic world. It's going fast in the charter school world. And also there's a big uptick in the Christian classical school world. So, you know, across many sectors, this return to a Christian anthropology-based education is making its mark. And because it's light, because it's beautiful light, and there's so much darkness closing in on us, that light is bright and desirable. So there is a lot of hope.
Thank you so much, Michael. I appreciate that. I want to thank all the speakers for your participation. I want to thank all of our many attendees for joining us and supporting the movement. If anybody from the audience has follow-up questions, we invite you to do so by email on the faithnotrace.org website of the Concerned Parents, Donors, and Alumni of Jesuit High School. I also want to leave with an anecdote that I think summarizes the state that we're all in, where we have been and where we need to go. And it goes to something that Andrew said, and it's my spin on it, which is learning the Catholic counterpoint. I attended, as I mentioned, Jesuit schools, and one of the 33 Jesuits I was taught by between 1974 and 1981, I'm sorry, 1970 and 1981, was Father Andrew Boss. He was in the Department of Economics at the University of San Francisco. He, by the time I had him, was about 75, so he was born around 1900, but he was also around during the violent strikes that beset the city of San Francisco and its port in the 1930s. And they were Marxist driven. And San Francisco's unions at that time, particularly the maritime unions, were overwhelmingly infiltrated by Marxists. Father Boss was the Catholic counterpoint. He founded a Catholic labor movement that was a perfect counterpoint and eventually became more popular and more powerful and more influential than the Marxists that had provoked their origin. And it was Father Boss, in his sometimes cranky, but illustrative and very direct, inspired way, said, "And I did that because we have a Catholic counterpoint. Understand that as we send you off into the world. He said that 3 or 4 times throughout the semester, but in that particular regard, it became memorable, and it even formed a new brain crease for me because I remember that moment and I remember his sense of the dramatic because he was speaking firsthand about the threats that beset good working people on the San Francisco waterfront. So we can pause in memory of Father Andrew Boss, a member of the Society of Jesus. May he rest in peace. So I'm going to end with a prayer, and it delights us all to ponder the Holy Spirit because on back to school in our Catholic pasts, our Catholic school pasts, we always prayed for the intervention of the Holy Spirit, particularly when we were about to take a test. So we call upon the Holy Spirit tonight, and this is very brief, and it's from the Pentecost sequence in the Roman Missal. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of thy faithful, and enkindle in them the fire of thy love. So I say goodnight to you all. I thank you all for your dedication, your commitment, your articulation. I thank our audience members for their own dedication and concern, and we shall certainly meet again. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.